Thank you guys for joining. Really excited to kick off our session here, Mastering the Past or Changing the Future Through Analytics. My name is Pedram Fayed. I'm the Senior Director of Analytics here at Tekion. And joining me today, David Spizak. Excited to have David with me, one of the pioneers of data. And both of us hope to unpack a wonderful conversation. We thought we'd keep it very conversational with everyone and just share some of our learnings. David certainly with how many decades now of experience, David? Just the four.
40 years and counting.
40 years and counting. I love it. And certainly what we want to talk about is some of the data points that we've all kind of looked at in the past and what are the data points that we're looking in the future. So to kind of kick us right off, I thought, David, maybe you can kind of share a little bit about what have you and I been looking at? What are the data points that everyone's been looking at for the last 4 decades that you've been looking at the business? What are the things that you've seen?
Well, there's a number of things that fascinate me about data. And to some of you, that might seem a little peculiar because I've spent most of the 4 decades studying performance. And if you're studying performance and you want to elevate performance, at some point, data has got to come into the conversation. What's really interesting and what's curious is that we spend most of the time studying the past. And we try to apply the past. Think about it. You take that data, what do? You pull a report. What's that report have on it? What happened yesterday, last week, last month, last year? And then you somehow try to say, well, maybe we could learn a lesson and apply it to this week, this month, or this year. But what's the problem with that? Well, if I'm a football team, the game plan that Tom Brady used against the Patriots last week, if he used it this week against Green Bay, what would happen? It would fail miserably. And that's what we've been doing, is that we've achieved a certain level of success, but we haven't been able to realize the level of success that we see companies like Amazon, Google, Apple, and every other top performing organization in the world. They are 100% data driven. And what's exciting and what we've been talking about is what Tekion, having the power of a fully integrated platform, what really gets me excited is having the power of a fully integrated data-rich, data-intelligent platform. What it allows you to do is not just focus on the past, but you now start to get to see the future and how that can drive your business.
I think you hit it spot on. Listen, we certainly value and covet historical data. Transactional data is very important to us. We've all looked at transactional data, which is financial statement data. We look at PVRs, units sold. And as David mentioned, I mean, certainly analyzing the past, there is value to it. But we try to really get everybody to think a couple of things that we want you to walk away and think about a couple of things that are really powerful. Just in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, think about all of the new data points that we've seen come to life and how fragmented those data points are. So today, if we wanted to join all this data, whether it's from our CRM, now we've seen tremendous amount of innovation and adoption with digital retailing. And think about the level of robustness of information that's coming from that. And what it really does, as David mentioned, instead of just concentrating on the past, that we could really start thinking about, well, how do we handle the future set of data? And a lot of the things that we believe are still important, we've broken data down into what we call descriptive data and diagnostic data. And it's helpful. Descriptive, of course, organizes the information. Diagnostic, for many of you, we look at forecasts, we pull something up, and we try to make sense of what that information looks like. But both David and I, in our experiences and the discussions we were having, the more dealers we spoke to, the more dealers said, I'm not as interested in what I did as I'm interested in what I should do. And this really resonated with us. And we started to think, well, in order to focus on what I should do, we've got to start moving the boundaries of the discussions that we're having into prescriptive data, into predictive data. And to really be able to build that foundation definitely takes a good, solid level of understanding of that descriptive layer. So, David, a couple of the things that you and I were talking about was, we need to know all of our metrics, and I'm sure everybody here has probably got one of their favorite metrics or some report that's coveted for them. But what are some of the things that you would say, just in the last couple of years in your conversations, what data points have you started to hear the themes about that you would say are kind of in that categorization of changing the future?
Well, I would have to say that And I want to bounce one other area in this conversation, but you have to start with customer data. You have to start with predictive data. You have to start with being able to leverage and understand the behavior of what your associates are going to do, what decisions your managers are likely to do, what are your clients likely to look for. And we have to understand at baseline that all of the dealerships I've ever worked with in the last 40 years, including my own, okay, has been, at the root of it, has had flawed data in it. Is that fair? There's noise in your data. I've never gone to a dealership where I can't find noise in your data. So, and if there's noise in your data, that means you've got bad information, and now you're leveraging information that is not necessarily rock solid. For example, we'll look at our sales results. Hey, we're selling a lot of black Traverses. Well, is that because you have a bunch of people coming in the top of the funnel looking for black Traverses, or is it because you made a mistake and you ordered 27 black Traverses and it's 48% of your inventory, right? So it becomes a self-fulfilled prophecy. So, having the power of being able to leverage some real data in a completely different way, in a novel and new way, is going to allow you to be able to discern between what is truth and what is half truth. Second thing is this: think about the majority. How much have you changed in terms of the data that you look at today? What are you looking at? Things like hours per row, ELR, PVR, product penetration. So much of that data, those metrics, they only speak to somebody's contribution to gross profit. It says nothing about their contribution to net profit. When the month shakes out, what do you care about at the end of the day? The bottom line is the bottom line. So having the ability to be able to get new data points, to be able to understand, for example, you talked about the sentiment. Could you imagine knowing that every time a client reaches out to your advisor, that you can actually recognize the sentiment? I mean, so many stores are hiring somebody to call somebody up and say, hey, are you happy? I just want to make sure before you get a survey, everybody's happy. Could you say you're happy, please? Even if you're not happy? But imagine if you knew. Imagine if you knew instantaneously when we missed the mark. Imagine if you knew, because I like to use data to catch people doing things right. I don't like catching people and beating our employees over the head with data. Having the ability to catch your people doing things right, could that possibly elevate morale? Could that possibly elevate retention? Could that possibly help alleviate staffing issues? So there's so many things from staffing, which is going to continue to be a challenge, to client acquisition that we can do with data.
No, and I think you're right. As you were talking about this, I'm sure if we polled everybody here and said, how many of you would like more data? How many would like more reports? Is anyone here looking for more data and more reports?
Said nobody ever.
Right? And it's one of those things that we like to, I tell this to everybody, complexity sells well, but it's simplicity that really drives results, right? And so every time we have this discussion, and it's fascinating because as the data mounds continue to grow, I don't think anyone goes, you know what, this is incredible. We cannot wait to spend hours on end to try to figure out what's really going on with our business. And I heard a statement that resonated with me. A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. And this has been a reoccurring theme. So to touch on a couple of the things that both from where we see where the future is headed is, accessibility of information has been one of the biggest challenges. For the most part, all of us today, majority of the data we consume is desktop-driven data. And we can only get in front of that information, and our best alternative has been someone emails us something. Now we have static data, and we're stuck with static data. We still have more questions. And I think really partnering with a company like Tekion, and one thing I didn't touch on, coming from the retail automotive segment myself, the lack of innovation to really understand the problem was a major challenge. And so when we looked at accessibility of information, it has to not only be accessible via mobile, but it has to be agnostic to formats of reports that, maybe one of you particularly looks at a report a particular way, but another group of you may look at it a completely different way. And so we thought, some of the things that we really want to get, the technology innovation going for are tools such as like NLP technology. And NLP, which is another wonderful acronym that we'll all kind of put in the hat, but it's natural language processing. Nobody here wants to learn about how to build more reports or become an Excel spreadsheet master or a Tableau wizard. What we're really trying to do is just simply answer some questions that we have, and the ability to answer these questions is what we're really hunting for at Tekion. One of those questions, David, that we get a lot is, I really would love to measure time. And for the longest time, the only thing that we've really put emphasis on time are areas such as service, technician efficiency, technician productivity, and at best, and you talked about data constantly having to be cleansed and managed. I don't think there's a person here that would say, you should see my technician efficiency and productivity report. I guarantee you it's 100% spot on. And we know when there is a risk for user error, where someone has to input information, there's a challenge. And so we were having a great discussion talking about the one area that we see that is not being focused on is the measurement of time.
Yeah, there are a number of areas that we have seen in the car business, right? That we start to measure time. For example, how long does it take from the time I get a used car to the time I get on the front line? Okay, what is that time supposed to be? Everybody's been saying it for decades. 3 days. Does that happen? No. In most stores, it doesn't happen. Why? Because I can't measure every milestone from the time I acquired a car to the used car manager puts it in the shop to they get an approval on the estimate. You know the drill. Okay, what about cycle time? Service advisors, how much time from the time they open a ticket to the time they close the ticket? Is that a big deal? It kind of is. In 10 years, I studied that. For 10 years, I studied that. And I found out that if it's over 2.5 or 3 days, what's the problem? Discounting happens. Policy happens. Client satisfaction problems. You lose retention of that client. But there's no standard way of measuring it fast, simple, and easy. Fair? Just no way to do that. And how much time for anybody out there? If a salesperson spends 8 hours in your store, how much time did they actually spend in front of a client? Do you know that answer? How much do they spend their time in a true activity that's going to contribute to revenue or retention? Do we know that? What about training? Do we know that? Is that a big deal? And then you contrast that with a company. Do you think Apple knows that? Do you think Walmart knows what sells on every shelf and every aisle? It's what made them the leading retailer before Amazon came along. And then what did Walmart do? They bought Jet. Why? Data, right? Data is the new currency. If you're able to leverage data in new and effective ways, you could do extraordinary things. And when you think about it, how can I possibly compete with my competitors? By the way, are your competitors the dealership next door or across the street anymore? No. It's any dealer that's on a website, period. But wait, that's not it. You also may have car lots. You may have CarMax. You may have Echo Park. You may have Carvana, Vroom, sure. And there's going to be countless others. And guess what? At some point, Apple's going to show up with that car. So how do we compete with those disruptors? With every single one of those companies is data-driven. How do I compete and live and perform at this level in the future if I'm leveraging data that's restricted, that's limited, and is based on a platform that is built in the past? It's just very hard to do.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's when you mention some of these things, we talk about cause and effect. So let's take a look at something like dollars per RO. For any of you that measure this metric, it's a 20, 30-year-old metric, but it's something that has always been the benchmark we've determined. And you can pick whichever one of the KPIs that you'd like to pick. We've benchmarked this data to be either good or bad in multitudes of ways. It's either historically, it's either objective driven, it's against our peers, right, from either a 20 group participation. But when we come back and we have the discussion with our teams and we'd like to understand, well, what makes a successful individual and why does somebody else struggle with something? One of these measurement points is time. And we've done something really fascinating is instead of just measuring these KPIs, when you build an ecosystem that is essentially built on a mobile device, Tekion truly being built from a mobile up system, we didn't build a desktop infrastructure. We understand what desktops were for the past, but we built a DMS to be driven from a mobile platform up. And when you do that, it's very fascinating because when we talk about time, you start to, when some workflow is measured through an actual activity on a mobile device, it's incredible the amount of information you get. So I'll give you a very simple thing we began measuring with time, which became really fascinating. We all believe that a quality drive inspection, spending time with our guests in the drive is really important. Tons of companies here will be teaching and training the value of doing a quality service walk around. But yet, when we measure performance of our advisors, what do we look at? Dollar per RO, hours per RO. And what do? Good old sort. We sort them from top to bottom. And unfortunately in our industry, having tenure the way that it is, the bottom half doesn't cut it, we replace them and we move on. And we just point to the fact that they didn't get the system, they didn't understand the process, they weren't tenacious enough. But why don't we have KPIs that can actually coach, grow, and develop our teams? And the future of this is, how do you leverage data both externally and internally? For the longest time, that's all we've done is we've taken this data, we've created trophy cases of whether we've succeeded or not. And so with this specific KPI, we began overlapping time. And we said, what makes an ideal service advisor? And when we found an advisor is spending an average of 2 minutes with a guest and overlapping it with a transactional data point such as dollar per RO, suddenly we started to see a signal. And it wasn't about more time. We didn't say you need to spend 15 minutes in the drive. And we found this really unique pattern, whether it was with domestic brands, luxury brands, regions of the country. Some areas was 5 minutes was the optimal time. In other areas of the market, it was 1 minute. And what our dealers really appreciated, they said, for the first time, I'm actually able to put my finger on what makes something successful and what is causing the pain. And I start to have a different conversation with my team. And I'm sure this resonates with all of you that when you're able to coach and guide someone to success, it's totally different than whipping or berating them to, you're not doing a good job and we need you to change that behavior. Well, we know we're not doing a good job. What guidance do you have for me to be able to change this behavior? And I think this was very fascinating because if I can get you to, for just a moment, envision the future. Why is time so important? We all covet time. Customers covet time. Employees covet time. If you took everybody here and said, I'm going to give you an activity to write a repair order or desk a deal or execute a finance transaction, and it's going to take an additional hour, would you say that they're going to be happy or dissatisfied? Of course, none of us want to do something that takes a tremendous amount of time. So we have an amazing focus on time, and the fact that this mobile ability and an ecosystem, as David mentioned in the beginning, it is completely well nested all together, really lets us focus on this currency of time. And we think it's a game changer. So, David, that seems to be a big area. And one other area that we see outside of this is, you touched on it, customer sentiment. For the most part, customer sentiment today, CSI, you want to talk about a tough lagging indicator, right? It's CSI.
Well, and if I could say this, is it fair to say, would it be audacious for me to say that the CSI scores that we've been seeing in our industry for the past 1, 2, 3 decades, that they're in all likelihood not necessarily an accurate reflection of how that client actually feels? Is that fair? It's true, right? I mean, for those of you, how many of you are familiar with the Net Promoter Score? The difference with a Net Promoter Score and CSI is what? Okay, it is, Net Promoter Score is actual true client satisfaction. If I'm happy, I'm going to amplify you. If I'm happy, I'm going to tell my friends about you, right? But the CSI score is something that we've kind of had to figure out how to navigate for years because the OEMs thought it was important, and I get it. But the numbers we're feeding back to them are not necessarily accurate, and they're not impactful. And the other thing I was going to say about time, the one you mentioned, technicians. Do technicians understand the importance of time? If you got flat rate technicians, if they're hourly, like, whatever. I don't care. I just punch a clock. But a flat rate technician, when you waste 1 minute of your technician's time, if you go out there to have a conversation, they're like, are we done? Are we done? Are we done? You're costing me what? Money. But what we don't understand, because we've never been able to measure it, is that's happening in every single area of your store. The second example is F&I. You know, when I started in this business, F&I was not normal. It wasn't everywhere. And the dealers back then in the early 80s were, the average dealer in the country was about $330 per F&I. Then we moved to about 800 to 900. And then the menu process came along. What happened when the menu process came along? The amount of time that our finance manager spent with clients did what? Went from here to here. And what happened to the PBRs? They actually doubled. And where are they now? $1,800, $2,000 and beyond. That was driven by the ability to reduce the time. And when the time went down, the client's happiness went up. They ended up spending more money. And we see that at Brian Benstock's store, Paragon, pickup and delivery. The service managers were so convinced that if I can't see that client in the drive, man, it's going to kill me. What happened in actuality? And Paul's here from NCM, and he sees his numbers in the 20 group. What happened? Their hours per RO doubled. Their dollars per repair order doubled. Their retention increased. The satisfaction got better. And then that turned into market share on the front. Yeah. So imagine having the ability to measure time, and then sentiment is the other holy grail.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad. I mean, sentiment is so fascinating, right? Because today it's impossible. Think about, even if you have a chat system and you're communicating with your guests, how can you go through and read through thousands of messages and understand the positive and negative sentiment? And one of the things that we thought would be great, and again, I'm going to use that acronym, NLP, Natural Language Processing, right? And I want to pause and really kind of give kudos to our leader, Jay Vijayan. One of the things that I was really kind of taken back with Jay, I believe this was the first time we saw a technology leader tackle this space and truly deliver innovative technology, not 15-year-old technology, packaged and sold, because at the end of the day, as dealers, we're not technologists. This convention is not for CIOs and leaders of companies that can really disseminate, is this technology for today? And I think that when you hear this technology of NLP, this is the benchmark for majority of technology companies, but yet it's not something recognized in our business. And so when David and I were talking about this sentiment discussion, I think the holy grail that everyone's looking for, ultimately with something like NPS is an indication of future loyalty. That question by itself, would you recommend a friend or colleague, right, is certainly it's indicative of whether you're going to be doing business with us in the future. And we know that the fraction points of where a customer defects could be with something very simple. I'll give you an example. Guest drops off their vehicle for service. They pick up their vehicle and the old smudge mark is inside the door panel. They take delivery of the car and they point that out to the porter. Hey, my car got a smudge mark in the inside of this car. Poor porter says, yeah, I'll make sure the team knows about it. Nothing ever happens, right? Guest takes delivery of the vehicle. 2 days later, CSI goes out. Do you think the customer responds positively or negatively to the service? What they remembered was the last experience they had in which there was a smudge mark inside their vehicle. Now, in this example, how would customer sentiment in real time change this particular outcome? Well, immediately when that guest already has been engaging with us, by the way, through a consumer portal, because one other big value is that we've created a gateway for you to speak back and forth to your advisor, so I don't have to pick up the phone and call anybody, because I don't think there's a soul in this place that can get a hold of an advisor today. If we all tried to get a hold of an advisor today, it wouldn't happen, right?
We actually did a project. We just called 5,100 dealers. When's the last time you called your dealership? 5,100 and something dealerships. And I know my way around a phone tree. I've called a few dealerships in 40 years. I would say my own personal success rate may have been 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
What do you think it's like for our customers? They can't get a hold of them. The second thing is, I bet you a lot of dealers have never thought of this. How much transparency and visibility do you have on the communications between your associates and your clients, right? You're not the NSA, you're not the FBI, you can't say, David, hand over your phone, I need to see what you sent to that advice. Can't do it, you can't even legally do that. But imagine if you had the entire conversation.
Sure.
And the ability, so for me as a client, I don't have to go through the phone tree. I don't have to track you down, it's instantaneous. And then you have 100% transparency on 100% of the communications with your clients for the first time in your life. And you have the ability to understand how happy, how satisfied, how delighted, how likely are they to say, I'm going to tell 5 or 10 or 20 people either something great or something not so good.
No, and I think it's exactly true, right? It's the leveraging of this information in real time so that you can take decisive action. And so you just finishing that, example all the way through, that because we've conditioned everyone, and by the way, everybody loves text messaging, right? I don't think anyone wants to pick up the phone and talk to anybody anymore. So text messaging is so easy. And we condition that behavior and we recognize that. So that in that same experience, when someone picks up the car and says, I'm disappointed with the smudge mark, immediately texting the advisor, we know that that advisor probably can't respond immediately to that concern. But again, leveraging a technology like NLP that can recognize that the conversation that's being had is negative, and the immediate notification to the management team that we just had a negative experience. Think about what would happen if you had the ability that in real time, each of the guests that you had today doing business with you were able to told in real time, hey, this individual didn't have a good experience at your dealership. That lasting moment is what customers remember. And that's the experience that they're looking for. And we talk a lot about experience because that is the new driver. We are past the game, and thank God, of pricing our way to success, right? There is no more discounting systems. I haven't seen a $2,000-$3,000 off MSRP. I don't know if you've seen anything like this. I don't know what the marketing companies are cooking right now, but it definitely has to revolve around experience.
It does, but is it fair to say that thanks to the chip shortage and a pandemic, that we have seen the value of every brand in America be fully restored? Is that true? I mean, it was just 2 years ago that the average Mercedes-Benz was being sold for $3,500 to $3,800 below invoice. And that was actually an aspirational brand. I'm not talking other brands that the ones, there's two kinds of products, ones that you have to sell and ones that people want to buy. Okay, and so what's happened now is because of this artificial, this synthetically created supply and demand, all of a sudden brand value has gone through the roof, loyalty, we'll see what happens when inventory starts to come back in.
Sure.
But when inventory starts to come back in, the question you got to ask yourself is, are you ready to stop having fun yet? Have you had a good time when it comes to profitability in the last year and a half, 2 years? Who here wants that party to end? So imagine having the ability to sustain that and add the volume back into the equation.
Sure.
If you think you're having fun now, okay, that's what allows companies like Apple to go from $300 billion in value to $3 trillion in value. Same thing with Tesla, same thing with Google, same thing with Amazon. So you've got the power to do that. We just can't do it without the data. We can't do it without understanding our customer sentiment.
100%. And I want to shift a little bit. We want to pivot because I hope that the discussions that normally everyone has, transactional data, right? You and I, we've been studying this for so long that we really wanted to kind of invoke thought for everyone to start thinking beyond the lines of what we've mastered in the past, right? And, of course, customer satisfaction is important. And some of the companies that you rattled off earlier, David, who are encroaching in the space, the Carvanas, CarMax, which has been continuously at it, they've mastered something that we call the golden triangle. The golden triangle is about people, process, and technology. And one of the things that the most important P, I would say, is people. And these companies do a phenomenal job of training their people. The reason I earlier mentioned to you that, for example, when we take a KPI such as time so that we can help educate someone to say, what can we do better, is really because we're thinking about the employee. And from an employee perspective, one data point that's not really discussed much in our business is the annual turnover inside of a dealership. Anyone want to take a guess what the annual turnover is? An advisor, a sales consultant? David, what's...
Well, I haven't seen the latest data, but we long have been an industry where we've seen 80 to 100% or higher in salesperson turnover year after year. Now, of course, fixed is fixed. You don't tend to see that same level of turnover with advisors and technicians. But here's a question I asked every dealer. If we're going to talk, I'm going to ask this question at some point. If you lose a bottom 50% performer, F&I, salesperson, advisor, manager, how long today in the year 2022 to replace that human? How long? What do you think? A month? 2 months? 3 months? 5 months? What about if they're one of your top 25% performers? How long to replace that person? You know, the reality is we can't afford to lose anybody. What we really should be doing is, you said it earlier, is growing that quartile 4 person into a quartile 3, the 3 into 2, the 2 into 1, elevating everybody, and then continuing to upgrade your staff whenever and wherever you can. But you can't do that by implementing things that we've done in the past. Those things, is it fair to say those have not worked, right? When I was saying this actually last night to Napo, could you guys name another industry that creates more millionaires and more billionaires than the auto industry? Could you name another industry where somebody can have a high school diploma or possibly not, and 2 years later be making 6 figures? Is that fair? Yeah. Could you come in as a salesperson and then end up like Alex Flores owning 4 dealerships a number of years down the road? Where else can you do that? But we have 2 issues. We got a PR problem that we're not doing a good enough job of amplifying what this industry can do for people. But I would say that we'd be a lot more likely to nail that if we did a better job of understanding how to keep those people, how to elevate those people, and how to allow them to have a career path.
100%. And you know, I think this discussion of people, you know, as folks that study that downstream of data, the transactional historical data, when we kind of start stepping back and we looked at some of the top performers in the country, employee tenure was one of the biggest signals of success. But yet it's not necessarily directly related on the financial statement. And some of the best operators in the country, they will tell you 100 different KPIs. They'll tell you all the things that are going on in the CRM. But ask them a question about how satisfied are the employees? What was the average tenure of the employees? You know who they turn to? Business office. Oh, the business, HR should have that information. Why is that component an administrative-led function? Why can't we leverage the same technology that we have? If we're going to be able to get instant insights from our customers and we covet our customers, why can't we leverage that technology so we can have that same instant loop back, feedback loop directly with our employees? Because if we all believe in that golden triangle, it's about people, process, technology. There's not enough technology in this building for all us to buy to be able to just demonstrate success. That technology is driven by people. And I think some of the companies that we're competing against who are encroaching in our space have invested heavily in people infrastructure. Now, why that's important is traditionally this would be another tool, another thing that you would have to add to your building block, to your technology stack. And that adds more layers of work. And these are things, again, when we look at the future of running a dealership, an enterprise, it has to take into consideration the ability to not just look at transactional data, customer data, employee data, and all of the other data points that are being created with all of the various companies that are essentially participating in this ecosystem. So I would really say, David, in your career, I believe that the Mercedes-Benz store, the success that you were able to put together, just to drive home this message of employee satisfaction, What were you able to deliver there?
Well, we took the store over a 5-year period of time. It was averaging about 1.2 million a year net profit. It was average at best. But when we started to focus, when I really started leveraging data, and I was leveraging data at least 10 years before anybody said the word data. I was geeking out on data way back when. And I became fascinated with it. I started leveraging it. And combining that with a truly special work culture, we were able to elevate from making $1.2 million a year to $25 million a year. And that $25 million a year that was echoed across the industry, we beat the second most profitable dealer by $10 million. They sold twice as many cars, we beat them by $10 million. And the footnote is we actually made $29 million. I gave $4 million of it to the managers, the 23 managers that made that happen. All anybody ever wanted to talk about was the profit. I wasn't interested because I understood where the profit came from. Our retention rate, our turnover rate was less than 3%. In an industry at that time was 89%. And the money is a byproduct of doing the right things. Is that a fair statement? All day, every day. We paid attention to the right things. We paid attention to the data when it came with people, about people. We invested in our people. We knew how they were feeling all the time, good, bad, or indifferent. And we were able to leverage that. And the byproduct was an astounding result in terms of profitability. And more importantly, we sustained that profitability when we had from a 15-day supply of cars to when we had a 65, 70-day supply of Mercedes. That was what was the big indicator that works.
No, and I think what a powerful statement, right? And the testament to this, right? And I think it's our job as the leaders from data perspective. I mentioned to you again, and I'll really drive this message home, that a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. It's our job to cut through the noise and find a signal for you. Because like I said in the beginning, no one's looking for more data. They're looking for less data, but at a higher quality rate. And why we felt that was a really important KPI is we don't want to take away something that is currently, we know is not being measured. Again, everyone clutches to their chest, the doc that's sent out today, all the various performance metrics that are sent. Kenny, I'm sure you got all the CRM stats. You know exactly what's going on today. But again, the accessibility of this information about, do we have satisfied employees? By the way, the other thing that we think is very important, onboarding our employees. When we look at some of these other competitors, right? When think about the ecosystem or a tech stack of a company, a technology company such as Carvana, onboarding one of their employees through their technology stack significantly easier than some of the challenges of, let me teach you the DMS, and then by the way, we're going to get you going with the CRM company, and then by the way, let me show you the inventory tool, and you know what? We just got this other equity mining solution, and we're going to show you that. And by the time we're done, those 6, 7, 8 solutions that we all thought were going to solve the problem created more friction in the business than we originally intended, and we created a tremendous amount of poor data that we no longer can do anything with. Even walking in here, we talked about this, that it's not the cost of these tools that is a problem. It's the cost of not using these tools that is a problem. And it's just the fragmentation is what we see.
Brian Benstock of Paragon, I've had the pleasure and honor of working with Brian and mentoring Brian and his team for the last 6 years or so. And Brian, more than any other retailer in the country, has been really chasing the concept of frictionless. And if you've known Brian, if you've seen anything that he posts, he literally lives, breathes, eats frictionless. It's not a marketing tagline that you throw on a billboard. But the reality is, how can I possibly deliver frictionless as an experience if the inside of my store, the processes that my guys have to use, the ladies and gentlemen, if it's friction filled? And if I have to log into 6 or 8 or 10 disparate systems that don't share data, they don't share information, I have to, in some stores, they have to enter client information up to 11 times. 11 times. And you literally see on our people's faces the frustration at times, don't you? We make it too hard. What's the number one thing that any business should be doing? Acquire clients, make money, right? So your job is to make it as fast, simple, and easy for me as a client to give you my money. Is that true? When you're not in your store and you're a consumer, could you literally feel how easy or hard anybody you do business with trying to give them $100? And if it's too hard, what do? You go somewhere else, man, right? Mm-hmm. That's why people use Instacart. That's why people pay $20 for a $12 or $10 sandwich at Grubhub or Caviar. Why would you do that? I want to eliminate the time waste, and I want to eliminate the friction that we have out there. So we got to start thinking about the fact that if I had a more frictionless environment, if I made it easy for my people to generate revenue, what would happen? Throughput goes up, morale goes up, satisfaction goes up, net promoter scores go up, profit goes up, and it's sustainable.
100%. And I hope just to maybe kind of summarize and bring a lot of this information together in the theory that we talked about, mastering the past or changing the future. A lot of the things that we want to really drive home and inspire thought about is, this measurement of time. Just really think about that today. And David put a lot of really great examples in that. And so we think time is really important. We talked about customer sentiment in real time, right? This is a really important metric, that we're not waiting 10 days, 3 days, 5 days, 20 days to find out somebody didn't have a good experience, and what can we do about it? And of course, last but certainly not least, the employee satisfaction, ESI. We've all measured CSI, but I cannot emphasize enough to you that ESI is going to be a future indicator of success. As David mentioned to you, running a record profitability of profit at this store that he ran, and the testament was employees. That's incredible, 3%, right? Tenure. Why these are all important is as we shape the future of data, the integrity of this data is really important to us. And in order to be able to build this data with integrity, we need a single ecosystem to be able to help generate this. And we also need an ecosystem that can continue to develop new data points. The reason I shared with you that, think about if we all agree, a lot of head nods in the conversations that we had that said, yeah, I definitely covet employee satisfaction. But what would you do if you wanted to measure it today? It's another tool that you'll have to add to the 6 or 7 different products. So one thing that we really want to kind of drive home the message of is when you run a cloud hosted and cloud native application, it's really easy and flexible to be able to continue to say, you know what, this data point is important. This data point is something that we're going to take into consideration, and that we can bring it to life faster than ever before. And we can protect the integrity of that data through one ecosystem. So these are really important things that we really want to drive home the message for, that we see. And David and I were having this conversation. It's not even a technology issue with some of our other competitors. It's the challenge of building in a complete ecosystem top to bottom. And we just know it's not feasible. And so really driving this message home to everyone and just inspiring them about these things we talked about, because we know it's no longer in our hands. You mentioned that today if we wanted to, we can order a burger and fries directly to the door in less than 2 clicks, right? And consumers are looking for that experience, but it's not just consumers. Those same people that are ordering a burger or fry are also your employees. Sometimes we throw that to the wind, and we've only focused on the fact that we've got to build an amazing, effortless system for our customers. But then we forgot, it's like, do you feel like maybe your employees don't use Uber Eats? Are they completely cut out from all the, the innovation in technology? No. And they're wondering the same thing. Why do I have to input this in 8 different systems, and the fact that no one's ever shown me this information? So I think if you really tied these together and you were able to shape the way of the future, I really think that these data points are things that hopefully we left you with that really inspire some thought. So David, I don't know if you have any closing points before we take some questions from anyone.
You know, if I owned a dealership today, and I have a small interest in a group, but if I owned a dealership today, I've got to ask myself, do the systems and processes, the technology, the platform, the solution that I'm using today, first of all, is it fair to call it a solution? Is that a fair question? Number two, does it promote employee retention? Number three, does it allow and promote my people to be able to do a more effective job, to acquire more clients, meet the client's expectation, and generate revenue, right? Number four, am I built for sustainable profitability? And number five, can I right now today compete with the organizations out there that are equipped with the technology that's built for the future? And if I can't answer those questions, I would have to give really serious thought about how am I going to continue to win, especially as our landscape. Right now, that old expression, either life happens to you or you happen to it, right? Well, right now, is it fair to say life is happening to us? And normally when life happens to you, it's not a very good outcome. But these are extraordinary times, and multiple things have conspired to create record profitability. So do I have control over that? Is it permanent? Well, the answer is no and no. So I think in order to put myself in a position, and the reason why I love what Jay's built and what the team does, what Padram has built and what he's doing with data, is because he's putting, and the store that I have equity in, yeah, we're moving. But how do I compete if I don't have the ability to be able to leverage technology, leverage data in a way that is going to promote happier clients, happier employees, and the optimal profitability? So I mean, that the bottom line is the bottom line.
100% well put. And I'll finish it with this. I've shared this with dealers. JFK said it best. When's the best time to fix your roof? When it's sunny outside. And it's never been sunnier than it's been in the last 2 years with record profitability. And so when you think about going through change, because certainly there is a change management process. We hear this all the time. We've done it this way. We've looked at it this way. But we really believe that if we can get participants who are willing to adopt that change and take a look at the way that they're running the future of their business, because it's no longer in our hands, that we're competing with true technology companies who are now in automotive, not automotive companies that are running technology. And I think if you can really kind of take that message home and think about the level of infrastructure that is going into these technology plays, that's what we really got to think about. So it's always great, David. You and I talk about, we could probably sit up here for hours and talk about data.
It's disturbing how long we could talk about data with each other. Hey, there's an old joke with the two guys that are in the woods and they see a bear, and the one turns to the other and says, hey, if we don't outrun this bear, we're dead. And the other guy, his buddy, says, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just got to outrun you. Okay, are you equipped to outrun the bear? We know who the bear is. There's a number of them.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the time. Appreciate the opportunity to join the conversation.
Absolutely, David. Always a pleasure.